Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class, a production of iHeartRadio. Hello and happy Friday. I'm Tracy V. Wilson.
And I'm Holly Fry.
Boy, did I love talking about Helen McNicoll this week.
Yeah.
Number one, I think it's probably clear to listeners that have been listening for a long time, I love Impressionist art. I love it. And I love the women artists. And I love that she and Dorothea Sharp made a space for themselves in a world that was not really amenable to women living on their own without husbands.
Right.
Or, outside of their family life for, specifically white middle class, upper middle class in the case of Helen McNicoll women. I love all of that. It was a challenging episode to work on because there's not a lot of information about details that would be really helpful to know more about for an episode like this.
Those are always tricky because it's like you can know what people have said about them. Particularly, in the intervening years, we are recording one coming up that I researched that's very similar in that regard. And it's like, but what was she like?
Right. Well, and she lived, she died more than a century ago, but that's still recent enough. And her, family was large enough that there may be, other remembrances, maybe even letters and diaries and things that just haven't been made available to historians or art historians. So it's possible that there is more information about her. But having kind of a big gap in things like what she was like as a person, what her thoughts were on things like the suffrage movement. There was also a ton of stuff that we could have gotten into in this episode, but didn't, like the role of the railroads and Canadian Pacific Railway in particular in Canadian history, like hugely monumentally impactful on Canada as a nation and on the Indigenous peoples of Canada. And like that was so far removed from the episode's core that I did not get into it really at all. But boy, I love all of her art, and I wish I had a little time machine and could have gone to that exhibit that just closed a couple of weeks before researching this episode.
Always a trick.
Yes, definitely so. There are some really lovely exhibition catalogs that have, lovely recreations, prints. What am I saying? You know what I'm saying.
Reprints of her work.
Yes. I just lost all ability to have language.
Sometimes it happens.
I don't have much to say beyond just sort of gushing that I love her. I love her artwork. I love looking at pictures of the same essential scene that she did and that Dorothea Sharp did and kind of comparing how they're similar and how they're different.
Yeah. One of the things that I really liked, we only talked about it briefly, but it is important to remember, particularly when studying really anything historical, but it does specifically relate a lot to things like art history and similar creative histories, is that we tend, when discussing history, and I say we meaning like humans in general, when we're talking about particularly once it gets past a certain point, it's like we lose our ability to recognize the wiggliness of the timeline. And it'll be like, the Renaissance happened from this to this. And it's like, well, in some places, but other places were still working it out.
Right.
Like well after it, or they came into it later. And this is a good example of how, Impressionism was kind of like, cool, we got it in France. And in Canada, it was still like, this is new.
Yeah.
I always think that's important to remember when you're looking looking at anybody's work is where they're from is a really important part of where they fit into that bigger artistic timeline.
Right, right. Anytime we're talking about things like Impressionism or the Renaissance, like in some cases, there's been, a sort of manifesto of artists saying this is what we are doing as artists, that becomes kind of a foundational text to the movement. But sometimes it's the process of looking back onto that time and trying to make sense of it and having a name for something as a movement. And that means there's a whole lot of stuff that was going on at that time that doesn't fit into that descriptor, similarly to what you were saying. And the fact that Impressionism became popularized in Canada so much later than in France. One of the articles that I was reading about it was like, I'm not trying to characterize Canadian art as like a sleepy backwater.
Right.
Because there was other stuff happening in Canadian art, other people, other movements. Canada itself, a young nation as a nation at that point, but it did, become kind of a later entry into this movement than a lot of other similarly connected to, the art world of Europe and specifically Paris.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Art, we always love it.
we do. I will also confess that when I was deciding about things to cover on Unearthed, I had no concept of what the BBC TV show Fake or Fortune is about beyond the title and the fact that they authenticated this painting. It is not like a British counterpart to Antiques Roadshow. And I think there is an Antiques Roadshow in...
Didn't it start in Britain?
I don't remember.
I'm not sure.
My association with Antiques Roadshow is watching it at my parents' house. But Fake or Fortune is more like it's all about art authentication. It is not people finding a piece of art in their attic and saying authenticate this. In a lot of cases, it's like looking back at big questions about the authenticity of different pieces of artwork. So my ignorance about this TV show was a part of my decision about whether to put this find into Unearthed. But the bigger piece was I just want to do a whole episode about Helen McNicoll because I was immediately captivated.
Okay, I'm going to get it out of the way and get the yucky thing out so we can get to talking about other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In that 1905 report from the Joint Committee on the Employment of Barmaids,
Mm-hmm.
they do the thing that we have talked about many times on the show that I absolutely hate, and you do too, I know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm paraphrasing, but it basically is like white barmaids actually have it much worse than black enslaved people because they don't have it. They're just stuck in this job and they're going to age out of it. And those people get treated better. It's like one of those horrible things.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a reminder to any of our listeners, anytime you see that in a document, whether modern or old, please know it's wrong. That's all. It just made my blood boil when I was reading it. I was like so angry. I didn't even want to put it in the episode. There are a lot of cool things about American Bar and the Savoy, one of which is that it was incredibly popular during World War II
Mm-hmm.
because Winston Churchill would kind of like headquarter there a little bit. Because the Savoy, we talked about how it was ultra modern and had electricity before buildings normally did, etc. They had built their own power supply. So when there were bombing raids the Germans bombed London, it was more likely to maintain power than any of the other buildings, which is very cool.
Yeah.
Listen, I trash talked Craddock a little bit here. He's very interesting in his own right. Heaven knows I've made a lot of his drinks. He really did a lot to promote the idea of drinking mixed drinks and cocktails as an elevated experience and not about drunkenness. He literally wrote papers about it. He would write newspaper articles about it. He would offer himself up for interviews. And one of the things that kept happening, we mentioned Ada's 4Ls, the people that would not allow the temperance movement to pass any laws in England at the time. But there were people in England that wanted temperance laws, and Craddock would always do this challenge and say, like, come to the bar, I will make you a cocktail along with, whatever meal you order. And if you can honestly tell me that it did not enhance your enjoyment of the meal and of life, he would say, then we can have a talk about temperance, but I guarantee you're going to love it. And and as far as I know, every time they did, or they didn't take the challenge because they probably knew, but it was just kind of interesting. He was a big proponent of it. I am very delighted to see that American Bar's current menu, and I haven't gone back through all of their previous menus, but there are not all of the drinks, but a lot of their drinks. They're like, here's the alcoholic version, here's the mocktail version.
Nice.
Which is really cool, and something that I am a big fan of, because sometimes people want to have the elevated experience of a delicious mixed beverage, and they don't drink alcohol for any number of completely fine reasons. So it's nice to remember that those people deserve to have fun times in a bar as well. It doesn't have to be about being intoxicated, but tasting delicious things. There is only one picture of Ada Coleman that I know of. And it would have been fairly late in her career because she looks, a bit more on the mature side at that point. And she looks so sweet. And she just has this great, very, she's cute as a button. And she has this very pleasant expression. And I can see why probably people immediately gravitated toward her and wanted to spend time with her in addition to being their bartender, but also as their friend. There are a lot of stories of people who she served becoming her friends, and in some cases including her in their wills and leaving her significant amounts of money, which is pretty interesting. I'm always fascinated by the relationship between bartenders and their patrons, because often there's like a weird parasocial thing that goes on. I just find the whole thing interesting. I want there to be a wild number of studies done of it, which is probably not going to happen to the degree I would desire. But I have not been to American Bar. It's on my list. One more excuse to go to London.
I have only been to places that were called American Bar that are not that one.
Yeah, there are a number of them. And there were a number of them in Europe, as we said in the show, that did not rise to prominence. And some of them were just like the way you would see Noodle Bar on a menu, right? That is not the name of the establishment, but says what it is. Some of them were like that just said that. And this one took on the name. I'm honestly not 100% clear if that was always intended to be its name or not. But there it is. One of the most famous bars in the world. I feel like we should also say, we mentioned 2 very pricey drinks that are on the menu. They have their regular themed menu. The drinks are not cheap, but they're not that exorbitant either. They're like in the, I think, I feel like I'm going by memory here. The mocktails tended to be in the 18-pound range, which is pricey, but, not 5,000, that's for sure. And then the cocktails tended to be like in the 27 to 35 range, depending on the spirit. So expensive for sure, but also not like quite as eye-popping as a $5,000 drink.
Yeah.
This was a very fun one to research, because as much as I hated how condescending that report was, I liked picking it apart and reading it. Being like, you dinglings. All of these problems are problems that are not caused by the women in the bartending industry. Why are you saying that women should get out rather than making laws that would protect them? Why is that the way? You want to make legislation. Why not protective legislation? Obviously, they never passed that, because women have stayed in the bartending industry and in the barmaid, as they were called then. Again, because they were usually aged out pretty when they would, not be considered a young maid anymore. But I'm glad we have Ada to guide us. I love the Ada Coleman project. I think it's so cool.
Yeah.
So I will follow it in the ongoing years and see how it does and see if I can support it in some way. Anyway, that is that. If you are coming up on your weekend and you like to have a cocktail or mocktail, I hope you find one that is absolutely delicious and delights your palate and taste buds. If you don't have time off, maybe you can still sneak in something yummy to drink, whether that contains alcohol or not. But we hope that you do get some rest and relaxation and that everyone is kind to one another. We will be right back here tomorrow with a classic story, and then on Monday we will have a brand new episode.
Stuff You Missed in History Class is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.